In our headlines on this Wednesday, April 15th, here in South Korea, shipping data shows traffic in the Strait of Hormuz was little affected by the U.S. blockade on its first day of implementation, with a Chinese-owned tanker among the vessels that passed through. And the South Korean stock market pushes past the 6,000 mark during trade today, with investors betting big on prospects of a second session of peace talks between the U.S. and Iran this week in Pakistan, as touted by Donald Trump. Speaking at a related meeting earlier on this Wednesday at the Blue House, President Jeju calls for the cutting back of red tape to allow for broader, sustainable economic growth. We start over in the U.S., where President Donald Trump has suggested that a fresh round of peace talks between Washington and Tehran may take place in Pakistan in the near future. Now, his comments came as diplomats from Israel and Lebanon sat down for a symbolic meeting at the U.S. State Department. Our Park Konu has the latest.
Very close to over is how U.S. President Donald Trump said he currently views the conflict with Iran, speaking to Fox News on Tuesday local time. Since the conflict began in February, Trump has repeatedly suggested the situation could be nearing its end. But this time, Trump's remarks come after hinting at the possibility of renewed negotiations within days in Islamabad, Pakistan, in an interview with the New York Post. The first round of talks last weekend ended without a breakthrough. If talks resume, Vice President J.D. Vance is expected to lead the U.S. delegation, as he did in the initial round.
There's a lot of course, mistrust between Iran and the United States of America. You're not going to solve that problem overnight. But yeah, I think the people we're sitting across from wanted to make a deal. What the president wants to make, he doesn't want to make like a small deal. He wants to make the grand bargain.
Vance stressed that any deal the U.S. president seeks would ensure Iran does not develop nuclear weapons, adding that it would help the Iranian people thrive and prosper. Meanwhile, Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif is expected to visit Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey this week as diplomatic efforts to arrange a second round of talks gather pace. Israel and Lebanon held their first direct talks in 33 years in Washington on Tuesday, which lasted over 2 hours. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who took part in the meeting, called it a historic opportunity to curb the influence of Hezbollah in the region. However, tensions remain high as Hezbollah launched around 30 rockets toward Israel on Wednesday, most of which were intercepted by the Israel Defense Forces. Lebanon's health ministry also reported that at least 35 people were killed in Israeli strikes over a 24-hour period. With tensions persisting across the Middle East and diplomatic efforts continuing, attention is now on whether renewed negotiations can help ease the conflict. Park Konu, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, shipping data reportedly shows that traffic in the Strait of Hormuz was little affected by the U.S. blockade on day one, with a Chinese-owned tanker among the vessels that passed through. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
A U.S.-sanctioned Chinese tanker has tested President Donald Trump's new blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, successfully passing through the strategic corridor on Monday. The vessel, identified as the Rich Starry, traveled through the strait into the Gulf of Oman in its second attempt, according to shipping data. The tanker, carrying roughly 250,000 barrels of methanol, flies under a Malawi flag, though authorities there say it is not officially registered. Reports indicate the ship has a Chinese crew on board. The transit comes as the United States began enforcing a naval blockade aimed at restricting Iranian oil exports. Under the policy, U.S. forces are blocking access to Iranian ports and intercepting vessels suspected of paying tolls to Tehran. A second U.S.-sanctioned Chinese tanker also passed through the strait from the opposite direction and is now in the Persian Gulf, reportedly en route to Iraq to load fuel later this week. Beijing has strongly condemned the blockade, calling it irresponsible and dangerous. China's foreign ministry warned the move could undermine an already fragile ceasefire and further threaten the safety of ships navigating one of the world's most critical energy corridors. Despite the heightened tensions, maritime traffic through the strait continues. According to U.S. officials cited by the Wall Street Journal on Tuesday, more than 20 merchant vessels, including cargo ships, container ships, and tankers, have passed through the waterway in the past 24 hours. Some ships reportedly turned off their tracking transponders in an effort to reduce the risk of potential Iranian attacks. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia is reportedly urging Washington to halt the blockade and return to negotiations with Iran, fearing the move could trigger broader escalation. Saudi officials warned that Tehran could retaliate by targeting other vital choke points, including the Bab al-Mandab Strait, a key route for Saudi oil exports to the Red Sea. Meanwhile, diplomatic efforts are gaining momentum. Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Egypt, and Turkey are expected to hold talks in the coming days, focused on ending the U.S. Iran conflict and reopening the Strait of Hormuz. According to AFP on Tuesday, the foreign ministers of the four countries plan to meet on the sidelines of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, scheduled for April 17th to 19th in Turkey. The meeting would mark their third round of discussions on broader regional issues, following a gathering in Islamabad late last month, where the Strait of Hormuz was also a central topic. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And South Korea has garnered additional oil supplies to address the shortages stemming from the conflict between the U.S. and Iran. According to Presidential Chief of Staff Kang Hoon-sik on this Wednesday, Korea has secured 273 million barrels of crude oil and 2.1 million tons of naphtha to be delivered through waterways that bypass the Strait of Hormuz. The crude oil volume is reportedly equivalent to more than 3 months of domestic consumption based on last year's data, while the naphtha supply is equivalent to 1 month of imports. Kang's address to the media at the Blue House today follows his week-long trip to Kazakhstan, Oman, Saudi Arabia and Qatar as a special presidential envoy for strategic economic cooperation. The local stock market pushed past the 6,000 mark during trade on this Wednesday, with investors betting big on prospects of a second session of peace talks between the U.S. and Iran. Our Cha Yun-kyung covers the latest rally.
The Korea Composite Stock Price Index surged about 3%, breaking 6,100 during intraday trading on Wednesday. The benchmark KOSPI opened at 6,141.6, up 2.91% from the previous session, and was trading higher at 6,146.06 as of 10:30 a.m. before hitting 6,183.21. The upward surge came on growing expectations that the U.S. and Iran will resume ceasefire negotiations after President Donald Trump hinted that these talks could resume in the next 2 days in Pakistan. Large capital stocks finished higher, including Samsung Electronics, which gained 3.75% to close at 214,251, or $145, and SK Hynix, which closed at 1.16 million won, or $789, up 5.44%. Other top stocks by market capitalization, such as Tusan Enerbility, SK Square, and Hyundai Motor Company, also recorded big jumps. By industries, construction, electricity, electronics, machinery, and equipment recorded an upward trend. The total market capitalization of KOSPI-listed firms was pushed up above the 5,000 trillion won threshold because of the rally. According to the Korea Exchange, the combined market cap stood at 5,035.5 trillion won, advancing from the previous day's 4,894.52 trillion won. The last time the main bourse's market cap exceeded 5,000 trillion won was on February 25th, but it then fell sharply following the ongoing Middle East conflict, which started on February 28th. The KOSPI closed at 6,091.39, up 123.64 points, or 2.7%. Cha Yun-kyung, Arirang News.
The International Monetary Fund has revised downward its growth projection for the global economy this year amid the unrest in the Middle East, but it has held steady its outlook for South Korea. Our economics correspondent Kim Do-yeon tells us why.
In its April World Economic Outlook released on Tuesday, the International Monetary Fund maintained South Korea's 2026 economic growth forecast at 1.9%. The figure remains unchanged from its January projection, standing firm despite a downgraded outlook for the global economy. South Korea's inflation rate for the year was projected at 2.5%. The IMF and the South Korean government note that while downward pressures persist from rising energy prices linked to the Middle East conflict, robust exports and the swift execution of a 26.2 trillion won or roughly $19 billion supplementary budget have cushioned the impact. Globally, the economic picture is darkening. The IMF lowered its 2026 global growth forecast to 3.1%, down 0.2 percentage points from its January projection. The agency cited a combination of surging energy prices, rising inflation expectations, and a flight from risk in financial markets as testing the global economy once again. Looking at individual economies, the Eurozone's growth outlook was cut by 0.2 percentage points to 1.1%, weighed down by the cumulative burden of energy costs. The U.S. economy also saw a slight downward revision to 2.3%. The most severe impact is concentrated in the Middle East and Central Asia, where direct disruptions to energy exports caused a sharp 2.0 percentage point plunge, bringing growth down to just 1.9%. The IMF assesses that downside risks continue to dominate, particularly supply chain disruptions from the prolonged war, and advises governments to prioritize price stability and maintain fiscal soundness. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And the latest findings by the Bank of Korea show import prices in March marked their highest monthly jump in almost 3 decades amid soaring global oil prices and a weaker won. Our Yoon-jin reports.
Import prices in South Korea surged in March, posting their sharpest increase in over 28 years, driven by soaring global oil prices amid the Middle East conflict. Preliminary data from the Bank of Korea on Wednesday show the import price index jumped 16.1% on month, accelerating sharply from a 1.5% rise in February. It marks the steepest increase since January 1998 and the 9th consecutive monthly gain since July of last year. On a yearly basis, import prices climbed 18.4%. The surge was largely fueled by a spike in Dubai crude, South Korea's benchmark, which soared nearly 88% on month to $128.52 per barrel in March. Leading the rise in import prices among raw materials was mining products, including crude oil, which spiked by 44.2%. While intermediate goods such as coal and petroleum products rose by 37.4% and chemical products by 10.7%. In particular, regarding the rate of increase for crude oil, the oil price index based on the Korean won reached its highest level since the index data began compilation in 1985. Meanwhile, the rate of increase based on contract currency reached 83.8%. The highest in 52 years in 2 months since January 1974 of the oil crisis. Bank of Korea official Lee Moon-hee said at a press briefing that from April 1st to 13th, the average price of Dubai crude fell 14.8% from the previous month's average, but the exchange rate rose 1% during the same period. And considering that uncertainty in U.S. Iran negotiations remain very high, it is difficult for raw material supply distributions to be completely resolved for the time being, making it difficult to predict the direction of import prices for April. Adding to the rising import costs is the Korean won that continues to weaken against the U.S. dollar, compounding inflationary pressures for the economy. In March, the average monthly $1 exchange rate also rose 2.6% within a month to 1,486.64 won. Yoon-jin, Arirang News.
Also on the local front, President Jeju has called for the cutting back of red tape to allow for broader, sustainable economic growth. Our correspondent Yoon Jung-min covers his remarks and more.
Streamlining regulations in a way that fits the global standard. That was the key message from President Lee Jae-myung at the Blue House on Wednesday as he presided over a meeting on regulations. He stressed the importance of enhancing the country's global competitiveness.
불필요하거나 비효율적인 규제들을 정리하는 거. 이 규제를 좀 소위 글로벌 스탠다드화하는 거, 국제 표준에 맞춰가는 거. 또 첨단 기술, 첨단 산업 분야에 있어서는 좀 네거티브 규제로 전환하는 게 이런 게 필요하겠다는 생각.
A negative system refers to allowing businesses to perform all actions that are not specifically prohibited. As the president urged officials to boldly do away with regulations that hamper growth, he also called for a careful approach. Another focal point was addressing the heavy concentration of resources in the capital.
지역 균형 발전이라고 하는 게 국가가 생존하기 위한 장기적인 지속 성장을 위해서 피할 수 없는 생존 전략이 됐다. 대규모 지역 단위의 대규모 규제 특구도 한번 만들어 봐야 되겠다는 생각이 들고.
South Korea aims to form regulatory-free zones outside the capital, centered on robots, renewable energy, bio and AI autonomous driving. Along the way, larger financial incentives will be provided for investments in regions far from the capital. Some have called for creating a position that can coordinate issues across several entities to manage complex issues that often emerge in the process of streamlining regulations.
I suggest that we introduce a system similar to the U.S. czar policy. As for regulation-free zones, a czar can be given authority by the president for coordination, because there should be someone who can handle legislative issues too.
The meeting took place after the Regulatory Reform Committee was restructured for the first time in 28 years and was renamed as a so-called Regulatory Rationalization Committee. Following the change, the committee will be headed by the president as chair. Wednesday's meeting was attended by more than 60 participants, including government officials, lawmakers, and businesses. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Staying here in Seoul, a digital platform that offers young adults more affordable dining options is gaining traction as many seek to save costs. My colleague Chung Hae-rim was out and about.
Kim Min-jung, an English teacher living in Seoul, needs a quick lunch near Sangsu Station before her afternoon class. But as she checks the menu boards outside, most meals easily exceed 10,000 won. That's when she opens an app called Geojimap, a map showing a range of affordable restaurants on her phone to explore her options. She settles on a cozy Korean restaurant offering a full meal with side dishes and soup. This satisfying lunch costs her just 7,000 won, or about $4.76.
Eating out in Korea has become so expensive lately. It's a real burden to spend 10 or 20,000 won just for a quick lunch. On Geojimap, you can find these hidden gem restaurants that serve delicious food but aren't overly expensive.
Here at another affordable restaurant listed on the map, the average price per item on the menu is 7,000 won. Recent data shows that the average cost of a meal in Seoul surpassed 11,000 won, meaning customers here spend less. Because of this, many people are using the map to reduce daily spending. In this era of high inflation, places like this have become essential for anyone looking for ways to cut back on food expenses.
I often visit this place because the food is cheap and tasty. I first came here on a school colleague's recommendation. It's actually a bit cheaper than the school cafeteria, but it tastes way better, so I end up coming here more often.
Roughly translating to beggar map, the platform traces its roots back to Geojibang, or beggar chat rooms. These are anonymous online communities where people share strict money-saving tips and scold each other for unnecessary spending. One of the members turned this into a tool, and the app and its associated website already have 1.2 million cumulative users.
I realized that saving on food is something everyone is interested in and can easily do. There was a lot of fragmented information scattered across the internet, so I thought it would be great to gather and visualize it. The restaurants registered on Geojimap are all shops without big advertising budgets, so I hope this app helps these small business owners.
Although born from the financial squeeze of the current economy, the map is proving to be a win, helping customers survive high inflation. Chung Hae-rim, Arirang News.
In other news now, South Korea has started talks with the International Atomic Energy Agency on building nuclear-powered submarines. Speaking to members of the media here in Seoul on this Wednesday, Director General Rafael Grossi confirmed that consultations are indeed underway, including technical talks on how such a program could align with non-proliferation principles. Grossi also made note of, quote, a serious increase in North Korea's capabilities to build nuclear weapons in light of recent reports that the regime appeared to have completed the building of a uranium enrichment facility at its Yongbyon nuclear complex.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. U.S. President Donald Trump's son, Eric Trump, who oversees the Trump family business empire, will accompany his father on a state visit to China next month. The White House is calling the trip personal, but critics are raising concerns over conflicts of interest. The Trump Organization spokeswoman said Eric Trump and his wife will join the May 14th to 15th visit in a personal capacity, and that Eric has no business ventures in China and will not participate in any private meetings. The trip is the first by a U.S. president to China in 8 years and is aimed at stabilizing relations between the world's two largest economies. Eric's appearance on the trip drew scrutiny as he serves as Chief Strategy Officer of American Bitcoin, a cryptocurrency mining venture with ties to Chinese equipment maker Bitmine. President Trump's nominee to lead the Federal Reserve, Kevin Warsh, has disclosed assets worth well over $100 million, putting him on track to become the wealthiest Fed chair in history. Warsh's financial disclosure on Tuesday reveals two investments worth more than $50 million each, along with dozens of holdings in artificial intelligence and crypto, many of which he has pledged to divest to comply with strict Fed ethics rules. His spouse, Jane Lauder of the Estee Lauder family, holds an estimated almost $2 billion in assets. Warsh has his confirmation hearing on April 21st. But Republican Senator Tom Tillis has vowed to block the confirmation until an investigation into current Fed Chair Jerome Powell concludes. Powell's term ends May 15th. In Turkey, a 19-year-old former student opened fire at a high school on Tuesday, wounding at least 16 people before killing himself as police moved in to apprehend him. The attack in the southeastern province of Sanliurfa saw the gunman open fire in the schoolyard before moving inside the building. 10 students, 4 teachers, 1 police officer, and a canteen employee were among the wounded. As of Tuesday, 1 teacher remains in serious condition. Chu Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
Unlike today, some areas will start tomorrow morning with lower temperatures. We'll even see readings in the single digits in some areas. That will lead to large day-to-night temperature swings of around 15 degrees Celsius. So make sure to dress in layers and take care. Tomorrow, strong winds and high wave advisories may be issued. Starting tomorrow morning, Jeju Island will see strong winds with gusts exceeding 20 meters per second. The offshore waters of the southern coast and around Jeju Island will also see 10 to 16 meters per second, with high waves expected. As for temperatures, tomorrow's Seoul will start the day at 10 degrees, Chuncheon at 7 degrees, Busan at 12 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 26 degrees, Daejeon at 25 degrees, Gwangju at 26 degrees. Looking ahead, rain will begin on Friday across the southern regions and on Jeju Island, and may continue in some areas through Saturday morning. As the rain moves in, the recent warm spell would briefly ease on Friday, before daytime heat returns afterward.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session, so do stay with us and thank you for now.